All right, welcome again, everyone, to this evening's program. We're delighted to have you here for Transforming Moments with Eva Fogelman and Zalmen Mlotek. I'm Ari Goldstein, Senior Public Programs Producer at the Museum of Jewish Heritage, a living memorial to the Holocaust. We are New York's Holocaust Museum. Tonight's program is part of a series that we are hosting in partnership with Descendants of Holocaust Survivors. Descendants of Holocaust Survivors is a forum for children of survivors to connect with each other, to share thoughts, feelings, and memories, and to learn and teach about the legacy of the Holocaust. Our partnership with the group is special for us because survivors and their family members have been at the foundation of our work ever since we were founded. And as survivors get older, the mantle of Holocaust memory is increasingly passing down to their children and grandchildren. So the first session of our Transforming Moments series was hosted in September 2020 with Alicia Wiesel and Eva Fogelman. We'll put a link to that recording in the chat. And we're delighted that you're joining us tonight for the second installment of the series, featuring Yiddish Artistic Director Extraordinaire Zalmen Mlotek. Please feel free to share questions for Zalmen throughout the program via the Zoom chat, and there will be a Q&A period towards the end. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Ellen Bachner Greenberg, who is the founder of Descendants of Holocaust Survivors.
Thank you, Ari, and thank you to the museum for partnering with us tonight to bring you this wonderful program. The moderator for tonight's evening is Dr. Eva Fogelman. Eva is a psychologist who is a pioneer in developing therapeutic techniques for Holocaust survivors and second and third generation descendants. She is co-founder of Training Program for Clinicians, Psychotherapy with Generations of the Holocaust and Related Traumas. She's also the writer and co-producer of Breaking the Silence, The Generation After the Holocaust, an award-winning documentary, and a Pulitzer Prize nominee of Conscience and Courage, Rescuers of Jews During the Holocaust, among other publications. Eva is the founding director of the Jewish Foundation of Christian Rescuers and co-director of Child Development Research, which includes international study of organized persecution of children. As part of Descendants of Holocaust Survivors, I will put information in the chat box how you can connect with us, find us, ask any questions. So please look forward to that. I now turn the program over to Dr. Eva Fogelman. Eva.
Thank you. It's impossible to summarize Zalmen Mlotek's achievements. They are musical, they are literary, they are theatrical, they are traditional, they are groundbreaking, they are really cool and of the moment. Zalmen, a graduate of Juilliard, gave new life to the venerable American Yiddish theater, the Folksbiene. Zalmen has been the catalyst in generating a new approach to an old Yiddish culture for an American public. Thanks to Zalmen and others, Yiddish is thriving. Zalmen has been a leader in shaping for American Jews what has been known as Jewish music. Zalmen is an author, a composer, an arranger, a virtuosic instrumentalist, artistic director, a mentor to many. Zalmen's family, rooted in the rich soil of Polish and Russian Jewish culture, was nothing less than Yiddish music and literary royalty. In fact, when his older son got married, someone remarked that if Yiddish had a country, this would have been a royal wedding. I'm looking forward to having a candid conversation with the man with the yarmulke behind the piano. Most people, Zalmen, may not know that you are a child of Holocaust survivors. What was it like growing up in your home?
Thank you, Eva. My home was full of Yiddish culture from morning till night. My parents, of course, spoke to me in Yiddish. My mother was born here. My father, of course, in Warsaw. But Yiddish was in the air all the time. My parents would have friends over, parties, and they would have their Warsaw friends, their friends from the old country, their friends from America, and they would go into to the wee hours of the night, having fun singing in Yiddish. And of course, when my parents founded the page in the Yiddish Forward, where they would ask readers to send in their memories of Yiddish song, my house was flooded. The apartment was flooded with mail from readers from all over the world, asking my parents, who Isaac Bashevis Singer called the Sherlock Holmes of Yiddish song, because my mother had this encyclopedic memory, being able to trace where songs were published first, who sang them. So anyway, so the excitement of these correspondences from all over the world was something I felt palpable all the time.
So it sounds like, you know, unlike many Holocaust survivor families, this was not a very morbid kind of home. It sounds like it was just full of music and life, and the fact that, you know, all these Bundes were getting together to, you know, to sing and party. So I'm wondering, in the midst of all of this, how did you find out that your father was a Holocaust survivor?
You know, I can't locate the time for you, or the place, or the moment, but it might have been in Camp Hemshach, the summer camp that the Bund created here for survivors' children. It might have been then, but I think earlier on as well. My father very rarely would speak about his experiences. And if he did, he would break down, and he couldn't speak about it, and I didn't push it because it was hard to see my father cry. But
And so,
yeah,
go ahead.
no. So I mean, I later learned, of course, about my father's journey and his leaving, you know, Warsaw when he was 21, and when the war broke out right in September. And
Before we go into what happened to him during the Holocaust,
yeah,
your father was about 21 when the Germans invaded Poland, September 1, 1939, and he already was a cultural phenomenon in Poland. Could you tell us a little bit about his family in Poland before the war? And
yeah, I mean, it was a family of 8 siblings. 3 survived: my father, my uncle Abram, and my aunt Sarah. Abram went with my father to Shanghai, and Sarah escaped through Russia and Siberia, and settled in Canada. But there was a big family. It was a family of 5 other siblings. My grandfather's, my namesake, Zalmen Mlotek, was a Melamed, a Yid mit abod, a Jew with a beard, you know, probably, you know, not too much dissimilar from what I look like today. But he was a writer. He was in a home. There were, you know, the Shabbos table was I imagine, you know, there were communists among his brothers. There was Bundists. I don't know, you know, if there was, I don't know about anything else, but I know that it was a very lively home, and they sang a lot. And my father was a poet from an early age, and his poetry resonated, and he became a teacher there in Poland, and a writer. He was very active in the Medem Sanatorium, which was a sanatorium for sick children, like a summer camp, but a place for kids with tuberculosis. And he published there, and he led the children's government there, and so he was a personality already from his writing.
how did your father get all the way to Shanghai?
Well, you know, it's a story that I learned. I never really heard the story from him directly, but he and his brother left Warsaw in right at the early days, I think the Germans came into to Poland September 2nd or September 1st or something. I'm not sure exactly, but a few days later he fled, and they went to they went to Vilna, and eventually they got he got a visa from Kuni Sugihara, who was giving out, who was miraculously writing visas for thousands of refugees whom he would see outside his gates. So I really have, Kuni Sugihara to thank for me being alive today. And he spent the war years in Shanghai. In Shanghai, he was a librarian. He worked in the Russian library. He was active. They had Yiddish performances in the Shanghai Ghetto. These are things that I discovered through documents. It's never something that I heard firsthand. And then finally, he got a visa to Calgary, where he was brought to be a Yiddish teacher in the Calgary Yiddish school system.
And how did he meet your mother? And first of all, who survived in his family?
Well, his family, I mean, the brothers, Mendel, Elchanan, Nassim, Moshe, they were killed, and Esther, the sister, were killed, and the three siblings, Zalmen, Avram Mlotek, my uncle, and Sarah Rosenfeld, my aunt, they survived. So the three of them survived.
Someone, by the way, asked on the chat about the Shanghai Ghetto, and indeed, Shanghai did have a ghetto, and the Jews were only allowed to remain within that ghetto and can only go out for special occasions. And about 2,000 Jews out of more than 20,000 Jews had died in that ghetto. But your father clearly made his mark. Even sounds like wherever he goes, he has, he makes his mark, and he continues to bring Jewish culture to whatever groups of people that he's with.
Again, Stille hate, quietly. He didn't talk about it. It wasn't like this was his mission. He just did it. And this is something that, was part of his character. He just found the opportunities to write or to create or to make things happen. And that's.
So tell us a little bit about what happened after Calgary. How did he meet your mother?
My mother, born here. My maternal grandparents came here in the early immigration in the 1910s. Leo and Bessie Gordon, and my mother also spoke Yiddish from home, and was a pianist. So and my grandfather loved Yiddish songs. My maternal Laser Gordon loved Yiddish songs. He was an amateur Yiddish actor. He was actually a haberdasher. He was a manufacturer of women's clothes, but he loved to act and he loved to sing. And this was what brought them together, my parents, the Yiddish song. And my mother was the secretary of Max Weinreich, the noted, founder of the EVA. And Weinreich was giving a course at UCLA. And my mother went and my father went. And I think it's there that their love affair began. At UCLA and in 49, and then came back to America.
And then they married and came to New York.
Right.
Tell us a little bit about how your mother and your mother's sister influenced your musical career.
My mother's sister was Malka Gottlieb. She was my first piano teacher. When I think about how my aunt influenced my musicality, I think about her hand on my hand. She would have me play the piano, and as I'm playing, she would put her hand on my hand or she would play and she would say, put your hand on my hand, feel the tension of how I'm approaching the keys. And I'll never forget that because it was such a eye opener for me in terms of how the one thinks that you just touch the keys and you press them, but my aunt came from a school of thinking that it was really about how you approach the keys and how you touch the keys. And that I think was a very meaningful part of my musical upbringing. And my mother and aunt used to play four hands piano all the time, whether it was Beethoven or Schubert or whatever. And I would just, I'm listening to all of this as a kid and taking it in. And so I eventually started to play when I was little. I was like 5 or something.
Wow. And do you have any particular song from your childhood, your adolescence that you'd like to share with us this evening?
Well, I have many songs, when I think about my childhood or adolescence, but I prepared a song that, my mother was responsible, and my father, from all of these songs that they collected, thousands of songs, they published these songbooks. And in one of these songbooks is one of the songs that they discovered and made available. It's a song called Lust Arein. It's Let Them In, and it was a song written for the Yiddish theater. They first heard it actually from a Aaron Lebedev recording, the great Aaron Lebedev from the Yiddish theater. And I thought I would sing it just as a sense of one of the important, what I feel was an important document of just one of many, many important documents that my mother discovered, and you'll hear it. So it starts, a junge Tate, a young father, eingebeugen, bent over, in Ellis Island, Wind und Weh, in Ellis Island, woe to them. Zwei Kinder kleine, hat erzeugen, he raised 2 children. You saw him in beide, Zen and Zay, there were orphans, both of them. Die Mame haben sie verloren, they lost their mother. Und hergekommen mit größtem Mie, and they came here with great hardship. Verschlossen is, for sie die Teuren, but the gates are closed. Den Taten lost men, zu sehen, it's see, their father isn't let them near them, which was a historical fact. Children were separated from their parents. Zerbrochen, zerrissen, broken, ripped, ungewissen, without conscience. Wären Herzen doch fadert here, our hearts are broken before the gate. O jeden Treffen, schon Zeit soll's werden. Jews, it's time you should hear. Die ganze Welt, the whole world, schreit jetzt zu dir. The whole world is crying out to you. Lass da rein, let them in. Lass da rein, let them in. Hat nicht kein Herz von Stein, don't have hearts of stone. Öffnet die Teuren von dem golden Land. Ihr seid Menschen fallen, streckt euch sehr Hand. Open the gates of this golden land. You see people are falling. Extend the hand. Lass da rein. Lass da rein. Zerbrech mit dein Herz, nein. Let them in. Don't break hearts. Die ganze Welt Menschen, the whole world of people, wird euch der Verbenchen, will bless you for this. Die Teuren macht euch, so open the gates. Lasst uns rein. Just a sample of one of the hundreds of songs that had an effect on me, so much to the fact that I included it in one of my shows that I created with my cousin.
I'm sure the audience tonight can listen to you for hours, but I'd love to continue our conversation.
Yeah.
And you became the theater director at Camp Emshech which was a Yiddish camp when you were still a teenagers. And 50 years later, campers still remember and talk about your musical repertoire, your energy, and how contagious it was for everybody. You sort of changed the whole feeling of the camp. And it feels to me like that's where your career began.
Yeah, I mean, thank you, Eva. I mean, Camp Hemshech, I came there when I was 15. I was a camper, but I played the pianos. I had, all my life. So, and I knew many songs. So they immediately kind of recruited me to be the camp pianist. So I would play early in the morning, every morning, right at breakfast. After we finished eating, 120, 170, 200 kids would want to sing together in the dining room. And I remember just this incredible sound of these kids singing these songs, Yiddish, English. It was the 60s, so we were singing, everything. We were singing, Phil Oakes. We were singing, civil rights stuff. But it was and Yiddish, of course. But it was really there that I think you're right. I think my love for being a conduit for people to sing became evident to me. It was something that is very, very much a part of me when I think about it. And this was after years as being a kid, but hearing it and seeing my mother do it with her mother's club performances, rehearsals at home, and I would be listening to them all the time. So I kind of got a sense of watching my mother do it with her contemporaries, of how it's done, how playing at a piano and letting people sing with you and inspiring people to sing. So
wow.
Camp.
Now, many of the campers were children of Holocaust survivors, and I understand there was a ghetto day, and that Danny Libeskin was also at the camp, and he designed the set for the event. Can you tell us a little bit about the ghetto day and your role in
it was actually ghetto night, because it was
night. I meant night.
Yeah, it was the night, and it was one day in the summer, in the second half of the season. We would the camp would announce that anybody who wanted to participate in this program should come to the casino, which was the social hall, after lunch for tryouts and for auditions or whatever. Not auditions, but tryouts, whatever. And what I'll never forget is that, 3/4 of the camp would come, because it was such a meaningful experience. Remember, 75%, I would say, of the campers and the counselors were children of survivors. So this was a 70-minute program that, was written by, my predecessors at camp, people like Elliot Pilevsky and Michael Fox and Michael Barron, and put together a narration in Yiddish and in English that we would then perform on that night. But what made the night special, in addition to that 70-minute program, was for the whole week, a monument was created on the grounds on one of the fields, and they created a kind of a monument. And Danny Liebeskin, who was the arts and crafts teacher, counselor, created a mural, a beautiful mural of a partisan, of a partisan holding his rifle. And all day, the representatives from the oldest bunks would stand there on Vach, just watching and in silence the whole day. And at night, at the end of the program, when everyone was like emotional, remember these are kids, from 5 to 16. My son today, jokes to me, did you have a staff of psychologists helping these poor kids deal with it? Of course, we didn't. We were all part of it. So anyway, after that event, we would march out in a quiet procession, silently, with torches. Councils are holding torches, and we would march quietly, or we would sing. I don't remember, to that denkmal, to that memorial place, and we would stand there for I don't know how long and sing, and lots of crying. And when I think about it, when I think about transformative moments that you know about, I think about I've never really thought about it until this week when you spoke to me about it, because uh, I, I I realize now what an effect that had on everybody participating and being a part of it, knowing that we all had this common
Background.
thread.
Right. Yeah, of course, you knew your father was a survivor, but you didn't know anything, which is, what I call
Right.
this whole period of denial. And then I think that this experience was a transforming experience for yourself and for the others who were there. Gee, we are all children of Holocaust survivors. And I'm wondering, and obviously, one in their lifetime doesn't have more than one transforming experience. And you went on to many conservatories to study. Could you tell us a little bit about one of those experiences that, perhaps had some transforming experience that continued for you?
Yeah, I was accompanying Yiddish singers and teaching in Yiddish schools, and I was working at the Workman Circle old age home. I would go there weekly and do programs throughout these years in my 20s and 30s. I studied at Tanglewood, where the Boston Symphony has their home, and I studied with Leonard Bernstein conducting. And it was after a program that he had conducted that I went backstage to connect with him and tell him how much I enjoyed it. And so he asked me, "So what are you doing with your life? What's going on? What's next?" And I said, "Well, I'm going to Juilliard next year, to be in the Young Conductors program." So he said to me, why are you going? Who needs another? Why does the world need another Verdi conductor or Traviata conductor? I think he said, when you know your music better than anybody else. And he had known about my involvement with Yiddish music and stuff. So I think that was a very big moment for me. I know it was. I spent a lot of years thinking about that, and it resonated for me for a very long time. And I think that had a big effect on my decision to veer away from this pursuit of a career as a classical music conductor
Yeah.
to the Yiddish world.
I'd like to get back a little bit to your father, who around those years is the director of the Arbitering, the Workman Circle, which administered quite a few Yiddish schools throughout the country and Canada. And your father, too, was quite a visionary. He started Yiddish cultural centers in New York City. He started a Yiddish film festival. He started a third Seder that was by hundreds of people would show up. How did you get involved in some of the activities that he started?
My brother and sister-in-law joke that it was my Moshe and Audrey. They joke that it was the family business, that this was the business. My father, I worked at the Workman Circle in those years that my father was the educational director. And I conducted the Workman Circle choir. And so with time, the previous director of the choirs, it was our Weiner, and then it was Eugene Malik. I took over the Workman Circle choir, and they were the basis of the third Seder. And in addition to that, I was also teaching at the middle school, at the high school. So I would prepare also the young kids, a couple of years young, not too much younger than me, in programs in Yiddish song. So I was involved in workman circle projects all throughout all those years. I then eventually musically directed a lot of the festivals that my father had started. He actually, it was his vision to have the first Yiddish music festival in 1969, when 25,000 people showed up at Central Park. And then ever since then, there was an annual concert that the Worker Circle now prepared. So
Well, I want you to know, Zalmen, that there are still people who approach me who miss your Yiddish choir.
Oh.
So I know you don't have time to start it again, but
Yeah.
now you had a whole career before the Folksbiene, and tell us a little bit about your career before your career and some of your major theatrical undertakings like The Golden Land.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that as I was working, I had gone to see Folksbiene performances as a kid, and in the 70s, Joseph Buloff asked me to write music for a production of Yoshke Musikant that he starred in, and Luba, his wife, directed in 73 or 72, I believe, at the old Folksbiene at 175 East Broadway. That was my first experience working professionally with the Folksbiene. Then later, in those years, I would also I did summer stock. I did English summer stock. I worked at Gene Stapleton's summer theater in the Totem Pole Playhouse. But then my cousin Moshe Rosenfeld, who he and I were asked by my father actually to create a pageant, a musical pageant for a Workman Circle convention up at the Stevensville Hotel, taking songs of the period, celebrating the immigration experience to this country. And my mother had tons of songs that she had collected and found and excited me with when I would hear any of them. I would just, and so Moshe and I put together a program that we premiered there. It was very successful, and then we turned it into a performance. We did a performance at the Folksbiene. Eventually, we did a engagement at the Norman Thomas High School, which got a 6-column rave review in the Times. Well, anybody who knows what a theater review, a 6-column rave review in the Times does, you can imagine what it did. The phones were off the hook crazy, and we were just playing on the weekends. Eventually, people from uptown and around the country came to see it, and then we developed it at the American Music Theater Festival, and then later it was opened professional on off-Broadway at the Second Avenue Theater. Eventually, we went, Leonard Bernstein had heard about it and recommended us to go to Italy to be part of a New York Theater Festival, and we performed several performances in Italy, in the mid '80s. But at the same time, I was before I put my hat, so to speak, in the ring to take over at the Folksbiene, we created a play, Moshe and myself and Eleanor Risa, a musical called Those Were the Days, that Mo Septi, Oliver Shalom, produced. And that was produced after a tour around America. It was produced on Broadway, actually, with the help of Manny Eisenberg and Victor Potemkin. And we opened on Broadway, and we played several months there. And it was having that experience that propelled me then when the Folksbiene asked me to write music for them in 1997, and I saw how the audiences were dwindling and getting smaller and smaller. I then I asked Eleanor if she would be interested in making a proposal to the board of the Folksbiene that a younger generation come in and help revitalize the Yiddish theater. And thankfully, the Forward Association and the Workmen's Circle, which were the two leading partners on the board, agreed to take us on. And 98 was my first year there as artistic director.
Well, you certainly have made quite a difference. What I just wanted to say very briefly is that many children of Holocaust survivors think that in order to remember and mourn the dead in their family, they have to somehow identify with the pain and the suffering. And what I always say is that the dead want to be remembered for the life that they lived, the values they taught, the Yiddishkeit they preserved, the texts they read and studied, and not how they were persecuted. So that's what I really like about your creative projects, is that they connect us to the language, to the culture that was destroyed. And that really is the most meaningful kind of way to honor the memory of the dead.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that there's a song that I wanted to play for you that in the casino, in the social hall at Hemshech, there were these following words: "La mir tragen dem Geist, was man hat uns vertraut." Let us carry the spirit in which we were entrusted with. And I wanted to sing it for you because while we hardly sang it there, I think on a subliminal level, I later found out what those words were from. And when you hear it, you can understand how this song, which emigrated from pre-war Poland in the Tzisho Shulm there and the shuls there, these survivors who founded Hemshech brought that that over with them. I just wanted to sing it for you if you don't mind.
Thank you.
It says, the verse goes, "La mir singen," let's sing. "La mir singen a Lied zu der Yiddische Schule." Let's sing a song to the Yiddish school. Was ist Zalmen? That is all. Was ist Zalmen? Was ist Zalmen uns so teuer? That is so dear to us. La mir singen mit Freude und mit Hoffnung voll. Let's sing with hope and with happiness. For a Welt, aber frei na neuem. For a world, a free one, a renewed one. La mir singen mit Freude und mit Hoffnung voll. Of a Welt, aber frei. And here's the verse that I was talking about. La mir lernen, let us learn. La mir lernen von die, welche haben gebaut. Let's learn from those who built. Und in Kampf and in their struggle. Und in Kampf sehr Mut nicht verloren. And in Kampf and in struggle, they didn't lose their courage. La mir tragen dem Geist, was man hat uns vertraut, schon von tausender Jahren. La mir tragen dem Geist, was man hat uns vertraut, schon von tausender Jahren. Let's carry this spirit that we were entrusted with for thousands of years.
Yes, and I think that that's what your whole mission in life is, and that you are helping all of us do that. Aside from your wildly successful Fiddler on the Roof in Yiddish, where you were the musical director, what would you say, some of your highlights in your theatrical and non-theatrical achievements have been over the last few years? I know it's going to be very difficult to summarize in just a couple of minutes because there have been so many.
Well, I mean, there was one in particular that I remember that I had. Well, this picture is of the Golden Bride, which was our first, the Golden Akala, which was a 1923 music operetta that we
Revived
at the museum. When Bruce Ratner had the vision and generosity, along with the board of the museum, to invite us, National Yiddish Theatre, to have our home at the museum. I thought, what would be the most fitting first performance. And I thought to show people what a 1923 Yiddish operetta was. In 1923, there was a cast of 40 on the stage and a pit orchestra of 28. So, you know, in today's economics, we did it with 20 on stage and 14 in the pit. So we gave people, gave people a sense. And these were two of our wonderful actors. This is, of course, Fiddler. But the Fiddler, the idea of Fiddler came to me many years ago when I was a kid, when I first heard the record. But what I wanted to talk about was the gala that we produced in 2014, which was to celebrate the 50th anniversary of Fiddler, where we invited performers from all over the world, including Topol and other performers, to come and celebrate the phenomenon of this musical that, which until the pandemic, there hadn't been a day where this musical wasn't performed somewhere in the world. So that was one major event. Another, of course, was our Kulturfest, to celebrate our 100th anniversary. We produced a festival where countries, where we had representational performances from over 30 countries from all over the world, and that was another thing. Of course, our performance of the Yiddish Pirates of Penzance, the Yam Gazlanim, was one of my all-time favorites that we did. There are many shows that I could mention.
Well, let's not forget Kids in Yiddish. Let's not forget The Sorcerer. And let's not forget your important event on January 15th for Martin Luther King Day, which is coming up again this year, right?
Yeah, Soul to Soul is our annual tribute to the commonalities between African American music and Yiddish music. And for a dozen years, we've been presenting a concert on Martin Luther King Day, and this year we're doing it virtually. It's available online, and it will be a pay-per-view kind of a thing for people all over the world to tune in. And as well as next week, actually, I'm doing another performance at Temple Emmanuel with Stephen Skybell, our Fiddler. We've been spending the last 8 months meeting weekly, and he has a repertoire now of over 60 songs. So if anybody remembers, how committed his performance was as Tevye, you can imagine how he has approached all this new Yiddish material. It's a big thrill for me. So we're going to do that next week. So there are things coming up.
Well, one thing in addition to your musical talents, you are an amazing teacher. Most of your actors in Fiddler on the Roof did not know a word of Yiddish. And when we heard them, they all sounded authentic Yiddish speakers. And that's all really thanks to you.
Well, I do want to give credit where credit is due. It's really not all thanks to me, but I had an amazing staff of Yiddish coaches, led by Muttel Didner, our associate artistic director, and Sabina Bruckner, our literary manager. Both of them worked all the time with the actors, and the actors, really, and they prepared tapes for them. Muttel prepared tapes so that they could study their text, but they really wanted to get it right. They understood why we were doing it. And I said to them from the very first rehearsal, I said, the vast percentage of our audiences does not speak Yiddish anymore, but they have a connection with Yiddish. They have some kind of connection. So it's our responsibility to present it as authentic as we possibly can for those Yiddish speakers who are coming, so they can connect and hearing that. And they worked very hard. Our actors, incredible actors, they all worked incredibly hard.
Okay. Unfortunately, our conversation is going to have to end, Zalmen. I wish it could continue, but I would like to ask you one final question, which is that we children of survivors often think about continuity and what we're transmitting to second, third, fourth generations. And I know your sons and daughter are innovators in their own right. And as we know, the branch doesn't fall far from the tree. So could you tell us a little bit about your kids today?
Yeah, before I tell you about my kids, I have to tell you about my wife, who is responsible. I would say responsible,
Okay.
right? I mean, my wife.
It takes two to tango.
Yeah, I mean, it's thanks to my wife and her family, Debbie and her family, that broadened my whole involvement in Yiddishkeit. My wife comes from a traditional home, and I never I never knew what Shabbos was. I never celebrated the holidays in a traditional way. We celebrated them in our own way, but my wife introduced me to a whole spiritual level of Yiddishkeit that I never had experienced. So it's in that, it's in that context that I'm blessed, that we are blessed with three wonderful children. That's Avram holding Hillel, who's was a baby at the time. He's now 4, and Ravaya is my other Anikel granddaughter. They also have a third one now, Shabtai Elimelech, and Elisha and Alex are there in the middle, and Sarah is next to my wife Debbie, and Sarah made Aliyah. So my sons are my Avram is a rabbi. He's the rabbi in residence at the JCC. He formed an organization with his friend John Leaner called BASE, which opens rabbinical couples open their homes to teach young people what it is, what Yiddishkeit is about, and offers services, offers counseling. And Alicia is a budding film writer, screenwriter, and Sarah is made Aliyah, and is working now as a teacher in the Israeli school system. So these are my daughter-in-laws, Yael, who's a social worker, and Alex, who's in law school. And this was a recent this summer in Onset, Massachusetts, where Debbie's family has always vacationed. So I'm blessed in that way.
Yes, you are blessed, and you have also blessed us with your talent, and we continue to seeing your works in the coming years. And I think we children of survivors have a special responsibility to make sure that that we continue the Yiddish culture and the Yiddish language that was destroyed. And I'd like to end before we turn it over to Ari Goldstein to find out what questions our audience has had. I'd like to end with saying that the world needs more Zalmen Mloteks.
Thanks, Eva. I really appreciate your the whole time with you and exploring this with you. Thank you.
Thank you both for this wonderful conversation, and Zalmen, especially for those musical interludes. We have received a ton of good audience questions. Please feel free to continue sharing them. We'll get to as many as we can in the next 10 minutes here. I'll try to bunch them. There's 2 here from Eva Kaufman and Harriet Jackson about, one is, can you tell us more about your mother as a musician? And the second is, please discuss how your parents went about collecting and preserving Yiddish music. Isn't their collection the basis of the music archive at YIVO? Can you tell us more about that?
So my mother was a trained pianist. She and my aunt studied with Jacob Hellman, who apparently their teacher studied with Rachmaninoff. So there's a legacy of Russian piano pedagogy, and my mother played by ear as well as being musically literate, and it was her accompanying singers and teaching young women, mothers. They had the Yiddish shula had a mothers club where they prepared Yiddish shows, and my mother was responsible to teach them the music, and I was a witness to these late night rehearsals, to the point that one year, I think before I was bar mitzvah or around bar mitzvah, I had to substitute for my mother who was sick. Their collecting started, early on, but it was because of the column in the forward called Pearls of Yiddish Poetry that at first it was written by a guy named called Afolsha, a researcher. It was only years later that they revealed to the audience, to the readers, that it was them. And as I said, while my mother worked simultaneously at the Eva, and the Eva, of course, has millions of musical documents, but my mother was an important part of the solidification of the musical archives at the Eva. I think anybody at the Eva today will, who knows, who has seen my mother's catalogs, understand the effect that she had on collecting Yiddish music. And I was inspired by it to the point that my home is filled with thousands of pieces of music. When Lazar Weiner died, when Sidor Belarsky died, when Eugene Mal, when Joseph Lubakadis, and the families would call me and say, "Do you want music? Do you want music that we have in our collections? Would you like it?" And I just took it. So I have an incredible collection that one day needs to be archived and collected. But
thank you. Now there are some additional questions about your father. There's one from Sunny Rose here about why your dad's family members are not able to leave Poland like he and his...
Say it again, what?
Why some of your dad's family members were not able to leave Poland when he did. And then there's a related question here. How do you imagine your father dealt with the trauma of losing his family to the Nazis?
It's anybody who understands the history at the time, and can put themselves in shoes we can't possibly. But when you can imagine, at 39, the harbingers of what was happening was in the air. People knew about it. People saw it. And when the Nazis came and took over Poland, it was sheer luck, I think, that my father and uncle and then, and I know that my other uncles and had children, they had families, so it wasn't so easy to leave and pick up. And my grandfather, Zalmen Mlotek, was an older man at the time. I don't think, it was so easy to move. And what was the second part of the question?
How did your father deal with the trauma of losing his family member?
I think my father, he dealt with his deeds. He dealt with his pen. He was a prolific writer. He wrote essays, he wrote poetry. He created, when he was at the Workman's Circle, he created these festivals. He created manifestations of Yiddish culture. This is how he dealt. This is how, for him. I never had the conversation with him. I never, could. I choke up even thinking about it, because I know how emotional he was to talk about when he left Poland and what that meant for him. So I can just say that he was driven. My parents were always working. My parents, constantly working and loving their work, loving the fact that they were collecting new songs and new poetry. So it was a life of love and of excitement in this culture that they had together, my parents.
How beautiful that you do something that you love so much too.
Yeah, thank you.
There's a bunch of questions here, and I think this is good to address to both of you. There's a set of questions about learning common Yiddish phrases and what they mean, learning about Yiddish music. There's also some questions here about the experiences of kids and descendants of Holocaust survivors and how trauma passes down. So those are your specialties. So Zalmen and Eva, if you could recommend further books, reading, watching for audiences who are excited about what both of you care about, what would you recommend?
Well, I think an important thing to remember is that the destiny of children of Holocaust survivors is not in the genes, and that children of Holocaust survivors do go through a mourning process of first being in shock of how they learned, and then in denial, and then they have a confrontation of wanting to know what happened, and then a lot of feelings emerge, and ultimately we have what you've watched this evening, Zalmen Mlotek doing, which is a search for meaning. And so that we cannot get stuck with the survivor guilt of how individuals suffered, identify with their suffering, but rather, what do we do with all those feelings of the anger, the rage, the grief, the loss? And ultimately, we need to channel that into something constructive. And if we can do that, then what we develop is traumatic growth, and that we don't have to be stuck with identifying with just the persecution of the Jews. The other is, how do we identify as Jews? Many children of Holocaust survivors, those who grew up first in after the war years in the DP camps, there was a lot of negativity, stereotypes of the Holocaust survivors. So the early children of Holocaust survivors who were born after felt a lot of shame because newspapers were writing that the best people died, and those who survived must have done something devious in order to survive. So that obviously had an effect of not being proud of who one's parents were. The third generation today grew up in a totally different atmosphere, where today we were in awe of how these individuals were able to survive. We have them come and speak. We value and cherish every one of these individuals who was able to survive, so that today the third generation and children of Holocaust survivors have gone from a sense of shame to pride in the Holocaust survivor. And that changes one's identity, feeling very proud of one's background. And then obviously we have the communication in the family and what that was like. So children of Holocaust survivors, where they might have heard too much about the Holocaust at a very young age, might still be carrying a lot of anger. What does a young child do when they hear about all the horrors that had happened to people in their family? Obviously, it evokes tremendous amount of anger, and there's no place for the anger to go. Some of the books that I recommend, I always tell everyone to begin by reading Helen Epstein's book. And I think that that's a very good book to begin to read. And from there, I have a bibliography that people can take a look at that will lead you to many other books. There's also a book that was edited by Menachem Rosensaf, God, Faith, and Identity from the Ashes. And I think that's another important book to read, of identifying with children of survivors, grandchildren of survivors, and to try to see how other people have taken that experience of their parents and have done something meaningful in their life. And so we have to remember that we do not have to be traumatized. We, children of Holocaust survivors, did not personally go through a trauma. It is the survivors who went through the trauma, and we have a choice of how we identify with our parents' trauma. And I think that Zalmen represents a very important way in which one can identify with the trauma in a meaningful way.
Thank you, Eva. And Zalmen, what are your closing thoughts, I would say, and also suggestions for further exploration for Yiddish music, art, and culture?
I mean, certainly, in today's age, the internet is the key to many organizations in New York and around the country that are producing Yiddish events. I'm putting in the chat, the information for our Soul to Soul program coming up, but Yiddish New York just happened here in New York, where thousands of people from all over the world came together to play klezmer music, to learn about Yiddish literature, to celebrate Yiddish culture. There's the National Yiddish Book Center that does important work. Yiddishkeit LA, Yiddishkeit in Florida. I mean, there are many organizations that are producing Yiddish work. The Culture Congress as well does important work. So I would say that one can find it on the internet these days. And from the point of view of the Folksbiene, we since March really have transformed ourselves into a virtual organization. All of our programs have been online. And they're all archived. So there's many shows to look from there, and we're hoping to do more in the coming year as well.
Well, thank you both so much. I'm sorry that we had to cut off the conversation here because there are a lot of questions that we didn't get to, but we are at the hour mark. So on behalf of the museum, thank you, Zalmen and Eva, for this conversation. We're so glad to be partnering with Descendants of Holocaust Survivors to present it. It's what we do. It's what we're called to do in our mission as a museum, and we try to live it out in all sorts of different ways. So I would encourage everyone who's watching to check out the museum's website and look at some of our upcoming programs. I would also remind you that we are support from community members like you is what makes everything we do possible. So we deeply appreciate those of you who have donated, and we would ask you to consider doing so if you haven't yet. The same goes for the wonderful National Yiddish Theatre Folksbiene and Descendants of Holocaust Survivors. So I'm just putting this information in the chat. But thank you. Any closing words, Ellen?
Just thank you. It was a wonderful program, really uplifting. Your music is wonderful. The story is great. And thank you, Eva, for enlightening us as well. And thank you, Ari, and the museum for all you've done. This was a great program, it really was. Thank you.
I should mention, we'll send out a follow-up email tomorrow, which will include a link to a recording of today's program, as well as some of the resources that Zalmen and Eva suggested, and some other links for exploration that you might enjoy. So stay posted in your inboxes. Thanks again, everyone.
Thanks.
Have a good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night. Thank you.